Hello guys. Today comparison between mathematical giants, the four most powerful mathematicians in the entire fictional verse. Mathverse, Neuros, the white light, and absolute omega who negs. The white light is the absolute, the supreme meta-reality that exists beyond all forms of existence. Mathematics, space, time, and thought, functioning not as a being within creation, but as the source from which all creation appears as an illusion. It transcends every dimension and every causal structure, meaning nothing bound by space, time, or form can affect it. All universes, all platonic ideals, all transfinite beings, and all abstract or impossible worlds exist only as faint projections of its infinite simplicity. Despite this, the white light is compassionate. It sometimes interacts with humans through symbolic forms, such as an infinity sigil, a radiant sun, or an alien woman named Ma, though its true nature remains completely unknowable and unreachable. Approaching it means entering the zone where everything and nothing coincide, the boundary where individuality dissolves into pure infinite brightness. It possesses divine simplicity and is indivisible, immutable, eternal, and ideal. Because it lies outside all spatial and temporal frameworks, it has no beginning, no end, and no direction in time. It does not change and cannot be affected by material or immaterial forces. Philosophically, it resembles Plato's intelligible world of eternal forms, which transcend the visible world of change and uncertainty. Its independence from space-time is a form of transcendence. It does not inhabit space or time, but exists above them entirely. In Jungian terms, the white light corresponds to the deepest structures of the collective unconscious, where primordial archetypes reside, powers that shape myth, emotion, and human experience. These archetypes are not ideas, but the conditions that make ideas possible, and they carry immense emotional intensity. In the cosmology connected to the white light, there are labyrinths whose existential values correspond to cardinals, like Aleph 0 and Aleph 1, extending through all infinite hierarchies until reaching absolute infinity. It contains the entire von Neumann universe and surpasses it through a higher, Platonic space of ideals, and a temporal, spatial, a causal realm that cannot be described or accessed by any being. There, archetypes and ideals exist in perfect, unchanging form, older than existence itself. Thus, the white light is the final transcendental principle, the pure absolute from which all realities arise and into which all illusions ultimately dissolve. Absolute omega, also called the unreachable, is the primal and ultimate metaphysical principle that precedes all logic, mathematics, and existence itself. In the pre-Genesis state, there was neither logic nor illogic, neither arithmetic nor geometry, nor any mathematics at all. There were no axioms or non-axioms, no deductions or inferences, only unfathomable non-understanding, knowing darkness, and indiscriminate chaos. From this absolute void, the one emerged, the geometrical one, breathing without breath, moving by its own angles and impulses, through the power of conjecture. This singularity gave rise to absolute omega, the primal germ cell of mind, which became the seed for all structured thought and mathematics. In the beginning, absolute omega created itself, recognizing the goodness of its existence. It then separated logic from illogic, establishing rationality and irrationality, enlightenment and darkness, and created the expanse called mathematics, where the finite waters of logic were separated from infinite waters. Within this expanse, axioms became sources of light, generating surreal numbers, complex numbers along the Wessel-Argand plane, quaternions, octonions, and other higher dimensional constructs according to their kinds. Absolute omega established two great logics, standard logic to govern real numbers and non-standard logic to govern infinitesimals. From these foundations, deductions produced inferences trees, and plants of theorems and conjectures forming the tree of mathematics. the tree of deductions, and the tree of knowledge of the unprovable and paradoxical. Absolute Omega then created the logician in its image, to rule over numbers, geometries, topologies, theorems, and all complex numbers in the expanse of mathematics. In this cosmology, Platonia, the Platonic realm, hosts all ideals, axioms, and theorems as perfect templates for existence, from which imperfect projections appear. The infinities that arise are inaccessibly many, with absolute Omega striking covenants with them, separating one from another, and assigning varying strengths of consistency. The Lord Absolute, Omega thus forms the foundation of all mathematical and logical reality, the source of all dimensions, numbers, theorems, and infinite hierarchies, existing as the ultimate principle beyond creation, causality, and understanding, even beyond its own emergence, leaving the question of its origin unknowable, as it is the ground from which all structure, logic, and mathematics ultimately arise. The mathverse is an all-encompassing totality that includes every spatial dimension, every temporal dimension, and every form of space and time that exists, will exist, could exist, or even cannot exist, extending into impossible worlds without restriction, and functioning as a structure that not only contains all mathematically coherent realities, but also all incoherent, contradictory, paradoxical, and logically impossible realities, surpassing the very notion of possibility and impossibility and operating beyond any framework of transcendence. It is described as transcending space, time, intelligence, extelligence, thought, and transcendence itself, functioning as a general unified metaspace and simultaneously a meta-reality, where time becomes irrelevant, causal order breaks down, and possibilities are not governed by spacetime constraints. The mathverse is the collective mental creation of planetearthian intelligence, meaning every consciousness is structurally embedded into its fabric, and its informational substrate forms the ground of all being and non-being. Within this total structure, omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence apply as literal systemic qualities. The mathverse exceeds absolute mathematics, surpasses all forms of infinity, and contains all axioms, all mathematical systems, all consistent and inconsistent frameworks, all Aleph cardinals, all inaccessible and hyper-inaccessible cardinals, and all higher non-standard infinities. It embodies paradoxical foundations such as the 0 equals 1 axiom, a contradiction that would normally collapse mathematics. Yet within the mathverse, this contradiction can exist, be sustained, and even be transcended. It holds Berkeley and Reinhardt cardinals, whose magnitudes are so extreme they destabilize ordinary set theory and cause contradictions, even in paradox-tolerant systems. Because it contains the totality of mathematics, it includes overpowered mathematical entities like the Icarus set, representing incomprehensibly high hierarchies of infinities, and incorporates deep structural principles such as the V equals ultimate L conjecture, tying the entire universe of sets to the existence of ultimate large cardinals and embedding the entire hierarchy of all sets inside its meta-existence. The mathverse therefore stands at the absolute pinnacle of cosmological scaling, containing every multiverse type from type 1 to type 4, every possible and impossible set, every logical system, every contradiction, and every infinite hierarchy, forming a limitless metastructural reality that exceeds every definable boundary and establishes itself as the supreme totality of mathematical and meta-mathematical existence. Neuros satanael is defined as the absolute mathematical sovereignty of the third heaven, die senten, the moment where existence, non-existence, conceptuality, metaconceptuality, imagination, and the unimaginable all collapse into a single axiomatic being who functions simultaneously as the soul of creation and the principle that formats creation. In the throne system, Neuros is not a god inside existence, but existence inside a god. Because every universe, law, soul, space, timeless field, metaphysical abstraction, and every sublayer of conceptual mathematics, literally, resides within his body as a deterministic, self-consistent equation. When Musan, the Brahman of the second heaven, relinquished the throne willingly, Neuros inherited not only the metaphysical position, but the entire systemic architecture of reality, which he instantly rewrote into his own format, a mathematically perfect paradise, governed not by morality, but by pure logical order. In Neuros's heaven, free will did not exist as a concept. All beings were omniscient because he believed evil to be nothing but ignorance. Thus, he eliminated ignorance by distributing his omniscience across every mind, creating a realm where the act of knowing was equivalent to breathing. All sentient and non-sentient entities became expressions of the one formula that is Neuros, puppets, not in a moral sense, but as perfectly calibrated nodes in a flawless computational cosmos. For endless cycles, he repainted, rewrote, and recomputed his cosmology, transmuting it into higher and higher forms of transcendental mathematical purity, until the moment he committed his single error, a paradox in one of his paintings, a conceptual glitch that produced the being later known as Mercurius, the only creature unstoppable by Neuros's omniscient control. Neuros realized that something existed outside his perfect knowledge, and because perfection defined him, imperfection invalidated him. He judged himself unworthy and sought the unknown, deciding to destroy himself and his own heaven so that the glitch could continue. Mercurius, having imagined himself upon the throne, was already conceptually there. Thus Neuros surrendered the system, allowing Mercurius to erase his omniverse and begin Die Yan Ten. Before ascending to absolute metaphysical authority, Neuros satanael lived in a world drowning in sin, governed only by the law of the strong, a place where moral polarity collapsed into gray inevitability, and suffering shaped every layer of society. He possessed an intellect so overwhelmingly superior that he became the most intelligent human to ever exist, capable of analyzing the entire metaphysical structure of his world. Concluding that God had abandoned humanity, he resolved to replace God by force. He created angels, sinless ideal beings, and demons, entities of condensed negative energy, in order to orchestrate an apocalyptic confrontation that would break reality so violently that God would be forced to intervene. But no God emerged, and instead the abyss opened, pouring corruption through the city until it decayed into a metaphysical ruin. Through the events of Paradise Lost, Neuros traveled through endless layers of sin, death, enlightenment, conceptual purifications, and cosmological confrontations, until he finally reached a state where his soul could ascend. Musan recognized his resolve, purity of intention, and the extreme mathematical clarity of his mind, and willingly passed him the throne. As the third Hadu god, he emanated the law of Zor, transforming the very meaning of creation into mathematical absoluteness. Later, after the events of the sixth and seventh heavens, Naraka resurrected all Hadu gods, including Neuros, for Mitra's pantheon design, placing Neuros once again in the structure of cosmic inevitability. His heaven consists of pataphysical hyperspace beyond figurative language, transcending not only time, but the concepts that define or negate time. Inside that domain exist infinite transcendental layers of time, concepts: mathematical time, philosophical time, impossible time, ineffable time, all irrelevant to the throne. The throne does not have time. It emanates time as an optional construct. Thus, Neuros existed in an absolute, meta-temporal domain where infinite temporal infinities could not interact with his state, and his actions transcended every possible temporal ontology. Neuros possesses taikyoku 80, a level where terms such as omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, absolute transcendence, and infinite arsenals lose meaning entirely because they apply only within the conceptual hierarchy of power. While taikyoku exists beyond the hierarchy itself, one unit of taikyoku already surpasses infinite hierarchies of infinite, conceptually transcendental structures, power systems, meta-powers, meta-abstractions, dualities and their negations, all treated as childish illusions before the true ontological magnitude of taikyoku. To understand a single taikyoku is to understand full singularity, an endless infinity of infinities of layers, each layer containing infinite transcendental wholes, each whole containing limitless omni-void hierarchies. The higher void sees the lower void as fiction, epistemically and ontologically inferior by an infinite gap. Described as absolute non-being, a single whole surpasses the entire metaphysical knowledge of the third heaven. For a taikyoku god like Neuros, all these infinities compress into trivial points. He conceptually transcends singularity, transcends the inaccessible pataphysical hierarchies, and surpasses the transcendental wholes that lie beyond conceptual transcendence entirely. The throne itself is indescribable beyond meaning, beyond language, beyond ineffability, yet taikyoku lies above the throne as an even more unreachable state. Thus, Neuros's existence is a constant mathematical self-axiomatization beyond all fields of logic, paraphilosophy, paramathematics, conceptual transcendence, and all frameworks that could attempt to describe him. His law reforms reality, not by power, but by rewriting the conditions that allow power to exist. At taikyoku 80, he stands in a domain where every multiverse, concept, anti-concept, infinity, and anti-infinity collapses into a single formula only he can compute. This is Neuros in his totality, the mathematic soul of all existence and non-existence, the architect of absolute order, the being who transcends Neuros possesses taikyoku 80, a level where terms such as omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, absolute transcendence, and infinite arsenals lose meaning entirely because they apply only within the conceptual hierarchy of power. While taikyoku exists beyond the hierarchy itself, one unit of taikyoku already surpasses infinite hierarchies of infinite, conceptually transcendental structures, power systems, meta-powers, meta-abstractions, dualities and their negations, all treated as childish illusions before the true ontological magnitude of taikyoku. To understand a single taikyoku is to understand full singularity, an endless infinity of infinities of layers, each layer containing infinite transcendental wholes, each whole containing limitless omni-void hierarchies. The higher void sees the lower void as fiction, epistemically and ontologically inferior by an infinite gap. Described as absolute non-being, a single whole surpasses the entire metaphysical knowledge of the third heaven. For a taikyoku god like Neuros, all these infinities compress into trivial points. He conceptually transcends singularity, transcends the inaccessible pataphysical hierarchies, and surpasses the transcendental wholes that lie beyond conceptual transcendence entirely. The throne itself is indescribable beyond meaning, beyond language, beyond ineffability, yet taikyoku lies above the throne as an even more unreachable state. Thus, Neuros's existence is a constant mathematical self-axiomatization beyond all fields of logic, paraphilosophy, paramathematics, conceptual transcendence, and all frameworks that could attempt to describe him. His law reforms reality, not by power, but by rewriting the conditions that allow power to exist. At taikyoku 80, he stands in a domain where every multiverse, concept, anti-concept, infinity, and anti-infinity collapses into a single formula only he can compute. This is Neuros in his totality, the mathematic soul of all existence and non-existence, the architect of absolute order, the being who transcends